The mysterious arrival. The grand doors of the alien throne room creaked open, with a sound that echoed across the massive hall. A human figure stepped inside, his boots tapping against the polished, iridescent floor. His presence was unexpected, a lone human in a palace teeming with alien nobility. The air was thick with tension, towering pillars shimmered with faint, otherworldly light, casting long shadows over the assembled crowd. At the far end of the room, seated upon a throne carved from what seemed like living crystal, was the alien princess. Her regal attire sparkled as though it were woven from stardust, and her glowing silver eyes were sharp and commanding. Yet, as her gaze fell on the human, her composure cracked. Her lips parted in a soft gasp. For the briefest moment, shock replaced the calm mask she always wore. The alien princess, known for her unshakable grace, looked utterly unprepared. The human, whose name was Ryan, paused at the reaction. His heart pounded in his chest, but he maintained a calm expression. He had come here for a reason, and he couldn't afford to falter now. As whispers spread through the court, the nobles exchanged curious glances, their shimmering robes rustling like the wind. Who was this human? And why had he come unannounced? Ryan took another step forward, his voice steady despite the pressure of countless eyes. "Your Highness," he began, bowing slightly, "I've traveled far to deliver a message, one that concerns not only your people but all life in this galaxy." The princess rose from her throne slowly, her movements deliberate. Her gaze remained locked on Ryan, as if trying to see through him, to confirm what her heart refused to believe. "You," she whispered, so softly that only he could hear. "You were supposed to be dead." Ryan stiffened. Her words confirmed what he had suspected. She recognized him. This was not a meeting of strangers. Their paths had crossed before, under very different circumstances. He looked up at her, his voice low. "I didn't die. Not then, not now. And I'm here because I had no other choice." The court's whispers grew louder, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The princess raised her hand, silencing the room instantly. Her eyes, though steady, held a storm of emotions, disbelief, anger, and something else Ryan couldn't quite place. "You dare to enter my court uninvited, claiming to bring warnings of doom," she said, her voice regaining its royal authority. But her hands trembled, and Ryan noticed. She was trying to hide her true feelings. "I dare because I had no other way," Ryan replied, taking another step forward. The guards at the sides of the room shifted, their weapons humming with latent energy. One wrong move, and they would strike him down without hesitation. Ryan ignored the threat and kept his focus on the princess. "We don't have much time. An enemy is coming, one that will destroy everything if we don't act. Your people, my people, no one will survive." The princess tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And why should I trust you, human? Why should I believe anything you say?" Ryan hesitated, then reached into his jacket. The guards tensed, and the air filled with the sound of charged weapons. "It's just a holo," Ryan said, slowly pulling out a small device. He placed it on the floor and activated it. A glowing projection filled the room. It showed a fleet of dark, jagged ships moving through space, leaving destruction in their wake. Planets burned, their surfaces scorched beyond recognition. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the alien nobles saw the devastation. The princess's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "The truth," Ryan said grimly. "These ships are already on their way. They've destroyed 3 colonies in the past month. No one has been able to stop them." The room fell into stunned silence. The nobles looked to their princess, waiting for her to respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the hologram, her expression hardening. "You expect me to believe you?" she asked. "After all this time?" Ryan took a deep breath. He had prepared for this. "I know it's hard to trust me, but you need to know. I didn't survive all this time just to lie to you. I came back because I knew you were the only one who could stop them." The princess flinched slightly at his words, but she quickly masked her emotions. "You came back," she repeated, her tone colder now. You came back after disappearing for years, without a word, without an explanation. And you think you can waltz into my court and demand my help? Ryan's jaw tightened. I didn't want to disappear. I didn't want to leave you. But if I hadn't, neither of us would be alive right now. Her silver eyes searched his face, looking for answers he couldn't give. The court watched in silence, captivated by the tense exchange. Finally, the princess spoke. Guards, she commanded, her voice sharp. Take him to the holding chamber. I want him questioned thoroughly. And no harm is to come to him. Not yet. Ryan didn't resist as the guards moved to detain him. He knew this was only the beginning. The princess's shock had been unmistakable, but so was her doubt. He would have to prove himself, quickly, if he wanted any chance of saving her world and his own. As the guards led him away, Ryan glanced back at the princess. For a moment, their eyes met, and he saw a flicker of the connection they'd once shared. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him hope. The doors closed behind him with a final, echoing thud. Secrets of the past. The cold, metallic cell wasn't much, but Ryan had seen worse. The faint hum of alien machinery filled the silence as he leaned against the wall, his mind racing. He didn't blame the princess for her doubt. After all, he had been gone for 5 long years. For her, it must have felt like a lifetime. Ryan's thoughts were interrupted by the hiss of the cell door sliding open. The alien princess entered, flanked by 2 guards. Her flowing gown shimmered in the dim light, her silver eyes glowing with a mix of anger and curiosity. She dismissed the guards with a subtle wave, and they exited without a word, leaving the 2 of them alone. You've got 5 minutes, human, she said sharply, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Convince me why I shouldn't have you executed for trespassing and deceit. Ryan straightened, his gaze steady. I'll do better than that. I'll tell you the truth about why I disappeared and why I've come back. The princess crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Start talking. Ryan took a deep breath. Do you remember the siege on Draco's IV? 5 years ago, when we fought side by side against the invaders. The mention of Draco's IV seemed to strike a chord. Her hardened expression faltered for a brief moment. I remember, she said cautiously. We barely survived. Ryan nodded. But not everyone made it out. After the final battle, I was captured by the enemy. They didn't kill me, not right away. They wanted information. They tortured me for weeks, trying to break me. The princess's eyes narrowed. And yet, here you are, alive and conveniently showing up just when a new threat emerges. How do I know you're not working for them? I escaped, Ryan said firmly. But it wasn't easy. They experimented on me, princess. They used me as a test subject for their twisted plans. That's why I was gone for so long. I had to recover, to fight my way back. Her gaze softened slightly, but her skepticism remained. You expect me to believe you fought your way out of enemy territory and survived all this time on your own? Ryan hesitated. This was the part he had been dreading. Not entirely on my own, he admitted. I had help. From someone, or something, that I still don't fully understand. The princess's eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? There's a force out there, Ryan said, lowering his voice. Something ancient and powerful. It found me when I was at my lowest, on the brink of death. It changed me, gave me the strength to survive. But it came with a price. The room fell silent as the princess processed his words. Finally, she spoke, her tone quieter now. What price? Ryan looked away, the weight of his secret pressing down on him. I don't know if I'm fully human anymore, he admitted. Whatever they did to me, whatever this force is, it's inside me now. And it's part of the reason I knew I had to come back. This threat, these ships, it's all connected to what happened to me. If we don't stop them, they'll destroy everything. The princess studied him, her silver eyes searching his face for any sign of deceit. She took a step closer, her voice softer. "If what you're saying is true, why didn't you come to me sooner? Why let me think you were dead for all these years?" Ryan met her gaze, his own filled with regret. "Because I didn't want to put you in danger. I thought staying away would protect you. But I was wrong. They're coming, Princess, and they won't stop until they've taken everything. I need your help to stop them." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, the princess sighed, turning away from him. "This is madness," she muttered. "You disappear for 5 years, only to show up with warnings of doom and a story that's impossible to verify." "But you believe me," Ryan said quietly. She froze, her back still turned to him. "I want to," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But belief isn't enough. My people need proof." Ryan stepped closer, his voice urgent. "Then let me prove it to you. Let me show you what I've seen, what I know. Together, we can stop this." The princess turned to face him, her expression conflicted. "If you're lying." "I'm not," Ryan said firmly. "You know I'm not." Her silver eyes locked onto his, searching for any hint of falsehood. Finally, she nodded, though her expression remained wary. "You'll have your chance to prove yourself. But if you betray me, I'll make sure you regret it." Ryan nodded, relief washing over him. "Fair enough." As she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway, glancing back at him. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I did mourn you. Every day." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone in the dimly lit cell. For the first time in years, Ryan allowed himself to hope. But deep down, he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The impossible proof. The tension in the air was almost tangible as Ryan stood in the Grand War Chamber, a place few outsiders had ever seen. The room was vast, its walls lined with shimmering alien technology and ancient artifacts of immense cultural significance. The circular central table projected a holographic map of the galaxy, its swirling lights casting faint shadows on the gathered crowd. The alien princess entered, flanked by her advisors and guards. Her silver eyes betrayed no emotion, but Ryan could sense the storm beneath her composed exterior. The murmurs among her court had grown louder since his sudden arrival, and now, it seemed, the moment of reckoning had come. "You said you have proof," the princess began, her voice steady but cold. "Something that no one else could know. Something that would make me believe it's truly you." Ryan took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I do," he said. "But it's not something I can show you. It's something I have to remind you of." The princess raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. "Go on." He took a step forward, his voice quieter now. "Do you remember the ruins on Draco's IV? The last mission we fought together before I disappeared?" A flicker of recognition crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. "I remember," she said cautiously. "We were trapped," Ryan continued, his words flowing faster now. "The enemy forces had surrounded the ruins, and there was no way out. You told me to leave you behind, to save myself. But I didn't." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, allowing him to continue. "You were injured," Ryan said, his voice softer now. "Your arm was broken, and you could barely walk. I carried you through the tunnels for hours, dodging enemy patrols and traps. And when we finally made it out, you—" He hesitated, the memory cutting deeper than he expected. "You told me something. Something you swore you'd never say to anyone." The princess's expression faltered, the mask of control slipping just enough for Ryan to notice. "And what, exactly, do you think I told you?" Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You told me that you weren't sure you could keep fighting, that you were afraid of what you'd become if the war never ended. You said you didn't want to lose yourself." The room fell silent. The advisors and guards exchanged confused glances, unaware of the private conversation happening in front of them. The princess stared at him, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. "No one knew about that," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Not even my closest advisors." Ryan nodded. You trusted me. And I never told anyone. Not then. Not now. For a moment, the regal figure before him seemed to waver. She wasn't just the powerful alien princess anymore. She was the same person he had fought beside, laughed with, and loved. But the moment passed quickly, and the princess straightened, her expression hardening once more. "It's a good story," she said, her tone cold again. "But words aren't enough. I need more." Ryan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You know it's true," he said, his voice rising. "You know I'm not lying. But if you need more, fine. I'll give you more." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small battered object. It was a pendant, simple and unassuming, but its significance was unmistakable. He held it out to her, his hand steady. "You gave this to me," he said, "on the day we left Draco's IV. You said it was a reminder to never give up, no matter how hard things got. You said it was part of your family's legacy." The princess's breath caught as she stared at the pendant. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the familiar metal. "I thought I'd lost this," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "You didn't," Ryan replied. "I kept it. Even when I thought I might not make it back, I kept it, because it reminded me of you." The room was silent again, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The princess closed her hand around the pendant, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. Anger, sadness, and something else Ryan couldn't quite place. "You've given me much to think about," she said, her voice measured. "But this doesn't mean I trust you. Not yet." "I don't expect you to," Ryan said. "Not after everything that's happened. But I'm telling the truth, and you know it. You just don't want to admit it." The princess turned away, her grip on the pendant tightening. "Guards," she said sharply. "Escort him back to his quarters. I'll decide what to do with him later." The guards moved to surround Ryan, their weapons at the ready. He didn't resist as they led him away. But as he reached the doorway, he glanced back at the princess. "You might not trust me," he said, his voice steady. "But you know I'm right. And deep down, you know I came back because of you." Her eyes met his for a fleeting moment, but she said nothing. As the doors closed behind him, Ryan allowed himself a small, grim smile. The princess might not trust him yet, but he had planted the seed of doubt, and that was all he needed to start turning the tide. The escape plan. Ryan paced his small chamber, his thoughts racing. The alien princess hadn't spoken to him since their tense exchange, but he could feel the shift in the air. She believed him, or at least part of his story, but belief wasn't enough. Time was running out, and he needed her help to stop the threat he had warned about. A faint noise caught his attention. His instincts, sharpened by years of survival, kicked in. He moved silently to the door, pressing his ear against it. At first, there was only the hum of the alien energy field that kept him confined. But then he heard it again, a soft, rhythmic tapping. He stepped back as the energy field fizzled and disappeared. The door slid open, revealing a hooded figure. They were cloaked in dark fabric that shimmered faintly, blending with the shadows. "Stay quiet," the figure hissed in a voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Ryan asked, his voice low but firm. The figure pulled back their hood, revealing a young alien woman with sharp, angular features and striking violet eyes. Ryan recognized her as one of the princess's most trusted advisors. "Name's Lyra," she said. "The princess sent me. She doesn't trust you, not completely, but she thinks you might be telling the truth. If you want to prove it, you'll follow me." Now, Ryan didn't hesitate. He knew this was his only chance. "Lead the way." Lyra moved quickly, leading him through a maze of corridors that twisted and turned unpredictably. The palace was vast, its walls adorned with glowing alien rooms that pulsed faintly as they passed. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the building itself was alive, watching their every move. "Where are we going?" he asked, keeping his voice low. To the archives, Lyra replied. If you're right about the threat, there should be records there. Old ones. The princess thinks they might hold answers, if you're not lying. Ryan noted the skepticism in her tone, but chose not to comment. He needed allies, even reluctant ones. They reached a sealed door guarded by two imposing sentinels, their metallic frames gleaming under the dim light. Lyra approached them, holding up a small device. The sentinels scanned it and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the archives were breathtaking. Endless rows of crystalline structures stretched into the distance, each one glowing faintly with stored data. The air was heavy with the hum of ancient machinery, and Ryan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This way, Lyra said, leading him to a central console. She began typing rapidly, her fingers a blur over the alien interface. What are you looking for? Ryan asked, peering over her shoulder. Historical records on intergalactic threats, she said. If what you're saying is true, this isn't the first time our galaxy has faced destruction. There might be clues here, something we can use. As she worked, Ryan's attention was drawn to a faint sound in the distance. His body tensed. We're not alone, he said. Lyra froze, listening. The sound grew louder, heavy footsteps, echoing off the walls. Guards, she muttered, her face pale. They must have discovered the energy field was disabled. Ryan looked around, his mind racing. There was no way out of the archives except through the entrance they'd come in. Can you lock the door? He asked. I can try, Lyra said, her fingers flying over the console. The crystalline structures around them pulsed brighter as the system responded to her commands. The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by muffled voices. Ryan moved to the entrance, peeking around the corner. A squad of heavily armed guards was approaching, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. We're out of time, Ryan said. Can you find what we need? Not yet, Lyra replied, her frustration evident. There's too much data. I need more time. Ryan clenched his fists. He couldn't let them get caught, not when they were so close. He turned to Lyra. Stay here and keep working. I'll buy you time. What? No, she said, her eyes wide. You'll get yourself killed. I've been through worse, Ryan said with a grim smile. Just find what we need. Before she could argue, he stepped out into the hallway, his movements quick and deliberate. The guards spotted him immediately, their weapons snapping up. Halt! One of them barked. You are under arrest. Ryan raised his hands, taking slow steps backward. Let's not do anything rash, he said, his tone calm but firm. I'm unarmed. The guards advanced, their weapons still trained on him. Surrender now, and you won't be harmed. Ryan smirked. Somehow, I doubt that. With a sudden burst of speed, he ducked behind a pillar as the guards opened fire. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the walls. Ryan moved quickly, using the environment to his advantage. Lyra, he shouted, dodging another volley. How's it going in there? I'm almost there, she called back. Ryan grabbed a loose piece of debris and hurled it toward the guards, drawing their fire away from the entrance. He knew he couldn't hold them off forever, but every second counted. Finally, Lyra's voice rang out. I've got it. Ryan turned to see her holding a glowing data crystal. She waved him over, her face alight with urgency. Let's go. Ryan sprinted back into the archives, narrowly avoiding a blast that sent shards of crystal raining down. Together, they ran toward a hidden exit Lyra had discovered earlier. As they fled into the shadows, Ryan glanced at her. That was close. Lyra smirked, holding up the data crystal. But we've got what we need. Ryan nodded, his heart pounding. The princess would have to believe them now. The proof they had uncovered could change everything, if they could survive long enough to use it. Unveiling the threat. The stolen data crystal sat at the center of the room, glowing faintly as the alien princess stared at it with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Around her, a small group of trusted advisors and guards stood silently, their eyes flickering between the crystal and Ryan. The tension was palpable. Ryan leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, watching the princess carefully. He knew this was the moment that would determine everything. Either the crystal would reveal the truth, or he would be branded a liar, and likely executed on the spot. "This better be worth it," the princess said, her tone sharp as she gestured to Lyra. "Activated." Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand on the crystal. A soft hum filled the room as the crystal began to pulse with light. Moments later, a holographic projection sprang to life, filling the air with glowing symbols, charts, and images. At first, the data seemed fragmented, a chaotic swirl of information. But as Lyra worked the controls, the projections began to align, forming a coherent narrative. The room fell silent as the images told their story. The projection showed ancient star maps, marking the locations of long-lost civilizations. One by one, those civilizations were erased, planets scorched, entire star systems left as lifeless husks. The destruction was methodical, precise, and horrifyingly familiar. "This," Ryan said, stepping forward and pointing to the projection, "is what's coming for us. It's what I saw during my time in captivity. These ships, this enemy, they'd done this before. And they won't stop until everything we know is gone." The princess's silver eyes narrowed as she studied the images. "How do you know this isn't some elaborate forgery, a ploy to manipulate me?" "Because I've seen them with my own eyes," Ryan replied. "The ships in that projection. I was on one of them. They're unlike anything you've ever faced. Their technology is ancient, far older than anything your people, or mine, could dream of. They don't negotiate. They don't stop. They consume." One of the advisors, a stern-looking alien with deep crimson skin, spoke up. "And what do they want?" "Resources. Territory." Ryan shook his head. "Neither. They want annihilation. They leave nothing behind. No people, no structures, not even the natural ecosystems. It's as if they're erasing existence itself." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The images continued to play, showing the enemy ships in haunting detail. They were massive and jagged, like shards of obsidian tearing through the void. Their weaponry was devastating, capable of obliterating entire fleets with a single blast. Lyra's voice broke the silence. "The records indicate that this enemy has no name. The ancient civilizations that encountered them simply called them the Voidbringers. They appear every few millennia, wiping out entire sectors of the galaxy before disappearing without a trace." The princess frowned. Why hasn't this information been shared before? If these Voidbringers are such a threat, why isn't there a coalition of worlds ready to fight them? Ryan's jaw tightened, because by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late. They strike fast and leave nothing behind. "The only reason I'm standing here is because of sheer luck, and the fact that they underestimated me." The princess turned to him, her gaze piercing. "If they're as unstoppable as you claim, then why come to me? Why not warn the human colonies? Why not take this to someone else?" "Because your people are the only ones with the resources and technology to stand a chance," Ryan said. "Your fleets, your weaponry, it's the most advanced in the galaxy. But even that might not be enough. We need to act now, while there's still time." Her expression hardened. "And what exactly do you propose? That we march our fleets into the unknown and hope for the best?" "No," Ryan said firmly. "I propose we prepare. Study the data, learn their weaknesses. If we're going to fight them, we need to understand them first. And that starts with what's in that crystal." The princess studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned to Lyra. "How much of this data can we decode?" "It's vast," Lyra admitted. "But the crystal contains detailed schematics of their ships, their weapons, even their patterns of attack. It's a treasure trove of information. If we have enough time, we might be able to find a way to counter them." The princess nodded, her gaze shifting back to Ryan. "You've brought us something valuable. But that doesn't mean I trust you." "Not yet." Ryan met her eyes, his expression unwavering. "I don't need you to trust me. I just need you to believe me." She stared at him for another moment before turning to her advisors. "We'll analyze the data and prepare our forces. But make no mistake, if this turns out to be a trap, there will be consequences." Ryan nodded. "Fair enough." The princess gestured for the guards to escort him out, but as he turned to leave, she called after him. "Ryan." He stopped, glancing back over his shoulder. "I hope, for all our sakes, that you're right," she said, her voice quieter now. "Because if you're wrong, it won't just be your life at stake. It'll be all of ours." Ryan didn't respond. He simply nodded and walked away, his mind already racing with plans. They had taken the first step, but the real battle was yet to come, and he knew it would take everything they had to survive what was coming. The final revelation. The palace's war chamber buzzed with activity as advisors, strategists, and scientists pored over the data pulled from the crystal. Holographic projections of the Voidbringer ships hovered above the central table, casting eerie shadows that seemed to echo the looming dread. Ryan stood at the edge of the room, watching the chaos unfold. Despite their advanced technology and disciplined minds, the alien court was shaken. The data painted a bleak picture, one that even the most hardened among them couldn't ignore. The princess, however, remained composed. She stood at the head of the table, her silver eyes scanning the projections with laser focus. Her presence was commanding, a stark contrast to the unease in the room. Ryan approached her cautiously. "You've seen enough," he said quietly. "You know this threat is real." She didn't look at him. "I know it's real," she admitted, her voice low. "But that doesn't mean I know how to stop it." "Neither do I," Ryan said. "But we have to start somewhere." Before she could respond, Lyra entered the room, her face pale and tense. She held a datapad in her hands, its screen glowing with streams of information. "Your Highness," Lyra said, her voice urgent. "We found something." The room fell silent as everyone turned to listen. The princess gestured for her to continue. "It's buried deep in the crystal's data," Lyra explained. "An ancient recording. It's fragmented, but it appears to be from one of the civilizations that encountered the Voidbringers thousands of years ago. They didn't just fight them. They tried to study them." "Study them," the princess repeated, her tone sharp. "What did they learn?" Lyra hesitated. "It's difficult to say. The data is incomplete, but there's a recurring term in their records, something they called the Harbinger." Ryan frowned. "The Harbinger? What is it?" "We're not entirely sure," Lyra admitted. "But according to the fragments, the Voidbringers always appear after the Harbinger is awakened. The recording suggests that the Harbinger is both a key to their power and a potential weakness." The princess's expression darkened. "If the Harbinger is tied to the Voidbringers, then finding it could be our only chance to stop them." "That's not all," Lyra added, her voice trembling slightly. "The recording mentions a location, a place where the Harbinger was last seen. It's in uncharted space on the far edge of the galaxy." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. "Let me guess, that's where the Voidbringers are headed." Lyra nodded. "It's likely. If they're following their usual patterns, they'll reach the location in a matter of weeks." The room erupted into murmurs and debates. Advisors argued about the risks of sending a fleet into uncharted space, while others proposed defensive measures to protect their own territories. The princess raised her hand, silencing the room. Her gaze swept over the gathered crowd, her expression steely. "We don't have time for debates," she said firmly. "If this Harbinger is the key to stopping the Voidbringers, then we have no choice. We must go after it." The room fell silent, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. Ryan stepped forward. "If you're going after the Harbinger, you'll need someone who knows how the Voidbringers operate, someone who's faced them before." Her eyes narrowed. And you think that someone is you. I know it is, Ryan said, his voice steady. You don't have to trust me, but you know I'm your best shot at understanding what we're up against. The princess studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. Very well, you'll come with us. But know this, if you so much as hint at betrayal, I'll end you myself. Ryan smirked. Fair enough. She turned to the room. Prepare the fleet. We leave for uncharted space at first light. This mission is now the highest priority. Failure is not an option. The advisors and strategists dispersed, their movements hurried but purposeful. Lyra lingered, her gaze flicking between Ryan and the princess. As the room emptied, the princess approached Ryan, her voice quieter now. If we're walking into a trap, I need to know. Are you hiding anything else? Ryan hesitated. For a moment, he considered lying, but he knew it wouldn't help. There's one thing, he admitted. When the Voidbringers took me, they didn't just experiment on me. They used me. I was part of their crew, forced to help them destroy a colony. The princess's eyes widened, a flicker of anger crossing her face. You betrayed your own people. I didn't have a choice, Ryan said quickly. They would have killed me if I refused. But I swear, I sabotaged their efforts whenever I could. I delayed their attacks, gave people time to escape. Her gaze was icy, but she didn't interrupt. I didn't tell you because I knew it would make you doubt me, Ryan continued. But I'm telling you now because you deserve the truth. And because if we're going to stop them, you need to understand what we're up against. The princess stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. You've made mistakes, she said. But so have I. If we're going to survive this, we'll need to put the past behind us. Ryan nodded, relief washing over him. Agreed. As they prepared for the journey into uncharted space, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the unknown. The Voidbringers were unlike any enemy he had faced, and the Harbinger was still a mystery. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. Together, they might just stand a chance. The ultimate sacrifice. The alien fleet emerged from hyperspace into the cold expanse of uncharted space. The void ahead was darker than any Ryan had ever seen, as if the stars themselves were afraid to shine here. Surrounding the fleet were towering asteroid fields and swirling nebulae, an ominous prelude to the ancient secrets hidden within. On the command deck of the flagship, the alien princess stood at the center, her silver eyes fixed on the vast emptiness beyond. The tension in the air was palpable as her advisors and crew worked silently at their stations. Ryan stood nearby, his posture tense. He could feel the weight of every gaze that flickered toward him, a mixture of distrust and wary curiosity. This is it, Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. She gestured to a projection of the galaxy on the command table. The coordinates from the crystal lead here. The Harbinger should be within that anomaly. Ryan followed her gaze to a swirling vortex of light and shadow ahead. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its tendrils twisting like the arms of some sleeping giant. He shuddered. Looks inviting, he muttered. The princess turned to him, her expression unreadable. You've faced the Voidbringers before. What should we expect? Ryan hesitated, then said, They don't fight like us. They don't charge in with fleets or rely on brute force. They overwhelm. They make you feel like resistance is pointless. But this, he gestured to the vortex. This isn't like anything I've seen. The ship's sensors blared suddenly, cutting through the uneasy silence. The crew scrambled to interpret the incoming data. We've got movement. One of the officers called out. Dozens of ships. No, hundreds. They're coming out of the anomaly. The Voidbringer fleet emerged like a swarm of nightmares, their jagged ships gleaming like obsidian blades against the backdrop of the vortex. They moved in perfect synchronization, an unstoppable wave of destruction. The flagship trembled as the enemy vessels surrounded them, their ominous presence suffocating. Shields up, all units prepare for combat. the princess commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Ryan stepped closer to her, his voice urgent. If we try to fight them head-on, we'll lose. We need to get to the Harbinger before they do. That's the only way to stop this. The princess hesitated, her gaze flickering to the swarm of enemy ships. And what happens if the Harbinger is as dangerous as they are? What if unleashing it makes things worse? Ryan clenched his fists. Then we make sure it doesn't come to that. But we can't let them have it. You've seen what they're capable of. After a tense moment, she nodded. All ships, focus on defensive maneuvers. The flagship will break through to the vortex. We're going after the Harbinger. The fleet moved as one, their ships forming a protective barrier around the flagship as it plunged toward the anomaly. Enemy vessels darted toward them, their weapons unleashing deadly barrages. Explosions lit up the void, the screams of dying crew members echoing through the comms. Inside the vortex, the air grew heavy, the swirling energy pressing against the ship like an invisible force. Ryan gripped the edge of the command table, his heart pounding. "We're close," he said. "I can feel it." The ship's sensors pinged again, this time with a single, haunting tone. Lyra's voice trembled as she read the data. "It's here." Ahead of them, the vortex parted to reveal a massive structure floating in the void. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a monolithic sphere, its surface covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly with a dark blue light. The Harbinger. "It's alive," the princess whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. As the flagship approached, the Voidbringer ships began to pull back, forming a perimeter around the Harbinger. Ryan's stomach dropped. "They're not attacking us," he said. "They're protecting it." "Why would they?" Lyra started, but her question was cut off as the Harbinger began to pulse. The runes on its surface glowed brighter, sending waves of energy rippling through the vortex. The ship trembled violently, alarms blaring. Ryan's eyes widened as a memory surfaced, flashes of his time on the Voidbringer ships, of whispered voices and fragments of their language. He suddenly understood. "The Harbinger isn't just a weapon," he said. "It's their source of power. It's what connects them." The princess turned to him, her expression grim. "Then destroying it will destroy them." "Maybe," Ryan said. "Or it might unleash something even worse. Either way, we can't leave it in their hands." The ship rocked as another wave of energy burst from the Harbinger, this one stronger than the last. The crew struggled to maintain control, their faces pale with fear. "We don't have time to debate," the princess said. "Lyra, prepare the ship's main cannon. Target the Harbinger." "No," Ryan shouted, stepping forward. "You can't just blast it. We don't know what it'll do. Let me go down there. I can figure out how to shut it down." The princess hesitated, the weight of the decision etched on her face. Finally, she nodded. "You'll have your chance. But if you fail, we'll have no choice but to destroy it." Ryan nodded, his resolve firm. "I won't fail." As he suited up for the mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a one-way trip. The Voidbringers wouldn't let him get close without a fight, and the Harbinger itself was an unknown force. But he pushed the fear aside. If this was the cost of saving the galaxy, so be it. The dropship descended toward the Harbinger, weaving through enemy fire. Ryan clutched his weapon tightly, his mind racing. The closer they got, the louder the whispers became, echoing in his mind like a haunting melody. When he finally set foot on the Harbinger's surface, the whispers grew deafening. The runes beneath his feet pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, as if the ancient structure were alive and aware of his presence. He moved quickly, following the fragments of memory that guided him. The Voidbringers descended upon him, their towering forms blocking his path. Ryan fought with everything he had, each step closer to the Harbinger's core feeling like a victory. Finally, he reached it, a glowing chamber at the heart of the structure. The energy was overwhelming, searing his mind and body. But he pushed through, his fingers flying over alien controls. He didn't fully understand what he was doing, but the fragments in his mind urged him forward. As the Harbinger's energy began to destabilize, Ryan activated his comms. "Princess, it's done. But you need to get out of here. Now." "What about you?" she asked, her voice filled with urgency. Ryan looked around the glowing chamber, the walls crumbling as the Harbinger's power surged out of control. "There's no time. Just go." The last thing he heard before the connection cut was the princess's voice, a single word filled with anguish. "Ryan." The Harbinger exploded in a blinding flash of light, consuming everything in its path. The Voidbringer ships disintegrated, their connections severed. The vortex collapsed, leaving only silence in its wake. Back on the flagship, the princess stared at the empty void, her heart heavy. Ryan had saved them all, but at a cost she hadn't been prepared to bear. As the fleet turned to head home, she held the pendant he had given her, a reminder of the man who had sacrificed everything for a galaxy that had nearly forgotten him.